Yes, you've been introduced once before.
Okay. So I just want to thank you for this opportunity to speak, and I want to apologize for not being there in person, but it was beyond my control. So I'm going to try my hardest to make sure that you can all hear me and do this presentation over the phone. So I'm just going to do a check. Can you guys all hear me clearly?
Yeah.
So, again, my name is Eriel Tchekwie Deranger, and I am a Dene woman that belongs to the Athabasca Chippewa First Nation, and I'm currently working for leadership as a content communications coordinator and campaign coordinator. And it's I'm really honored to be able to work for my First Nation on this topic because not very many communities have the capacity or the support in their leadership to do the type of work that I'm doing. So I want to thank my leadership for allowing that. So I'd like to start things off by asking you all to engage in a visualization exercise with me. So if you guys could all close your eyes for a minute and picture yourself in a beautiful place in the wilderness, surrounded by lush forests. And in my case, I would choose the boreal forest because that's where I'm from. Imagine a place where there are pristine waterways and there's wildlife in abundance around you, in the air, on the ground.
Yes.
Okay, sorry, I just thought I lost you for a second. This was done through things like the fur trade, through fishing industry, through sustaining their families by providing for them from hunting, fishing, and trapping. And this very nature is the very essence of the Dene people and our culture and our identity. So there is no separation between us and the land. What's happening right now in northern Alberta is a sad story of industrialization and corporate greed. My story is a personal story, and just like the story that I told you, our people have a strong connection. And I just sort of want to back up and tell you about why I do this and why it's so personal for me. I grew up, my dad was a strong Dene bushman. He grew up and lived on the land. He was a trapper. And as a trapper, he encompassed everything that it was to be a traditional Dene man. He lived off of the land, he trapped, he knew where he was, seemingly in the middle of nowhere. And as I grew up, I remember my dad taking us up just north of Fort Macquarie to the town, or to the reserve of Fort Mackay. And as we were going up to Fort Mackay, we stopped at the Syncrude site, which is now huge. And at the time, it wasn't that big, and there was still boreal forests around. There were still river systems that you could go down, and we'd often go down and play by the river system. In the river, the Athabasca River. But at this time, we stopped at Syncrude, and my dad stopped. He made us all get out, and he pointed to Syncrude, and he said, "Do you see this?" And I don't mean to offend anyone, but he said, "This is what the white man does. The white man rapes Mother Earth. He pulls the oil out of the ground, and he poisons the rivers, and he poisons the air, and he poisons the ground. And he's doing it all for money, and he's doing it all for oil. These are the people that we're fighting. And when you get older, you will fight them too." And as a child, I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know that it was, the ground was polluted, everything was dead all around Syncrude, and I didn't want to be there, and I wanted to go back out to the bush. And if you fast forward about 15 years later, I remember finding out about everything that was happening in my traditional territory and being so disgusted by the expansions that were happening. And I really wanted to do something. And I remember I was hanging out with my good friend Clayton Thomas Mueller, who works with IEN, and many of you probably know who he is. And I was talking to Clayton about Tarzans and how I really wanted to do something, and I needed to do something. And he picked up the phone and he called my cousin Lisa, and he said, "Talk to Lisa, she's working on this issue." And as I picked up the phone, I said, "Hey Lisa, it's Bunchy," which is my nickname that my family calls me. And she said, I asked her, like, "What's going on? What can I do? I want to help." And my cousin started to cry. My cousin cried because she said, "Bunchy, we need your help." She's like, "I don't know what to do. They're killing us. They're killing the land, they're destroying everything. And I don't know what to do. I need your help. Please help." And it was at that moment that I was left with not to actually enact things to protect the critical habitat, but to say we should just kill all the wolves, which again is completely psychotic. They haven't done anything to enforce the Constitution Act to protect our treaty rights under Treaty Number 8. And in addition to that, they're actually trying to change laws to pave way for faster approvals and pave way for more devastation to our land and to our rights. And, you know, throughout the entire vast area of our traditional territory, it's being completely destroyed in order to extract oil, in order for individuals to continue to make money and to continue to perpetuate this idea of corporate greed. And this is the very thing that Canada has also been promoting as ethical oil. I don't know how you can see that as ethical. You know, tar sands have been widely recognized as the most destructive project on Earth and one of the largest industrial projects on Earth. And it's because of these serious impacts on the ecological systems, greenhouse gas emissions, and the impact on treaty and aboriginal rights. Now, Shell is one of the largest players in the tar sands, producing close to 20% of all overall tar sands production right now. Alberta has granted the rights to Shell to mine out the land that is actually our reserve land, and it's what some people in our community are calling the heart of our homeland, which is near Poplar Point. So, our community has finally said enough is enough. Last year, in September of 2011, our leadership stood up and finally filed suit against Shell Oil Canada for suing them for unmet agreements. The agreements that we're suing them for were made by previous leadership in 2003 and 2006. And these agreements were meant to provide adequate resources for our community to participate in mitigation discussions, map out our traditional areas, and study the potential impacts, and ensure that they didn't impact our traditional rights or sacred sites. And it was supposed to allow for our community to implement our own community monitoring program. However, if you look at the history of Shell and unmet agreements, it's not that surprising that they haven't met them. So, we filed suit and we said Shell needs to make sure that they live up to these agreements, and in addition to that, we will stand up to any project that Shell tries to put on the line. Because right now, Shell's failure to meet the agreement that they made with ACFN in 2003 and 2006 have actually led to the accumulation of harmful impacts not only on the environment, but also on our constitutionally protected rights and culture to be able to live distance lifestyles, to be able to continue to practice our culture and rights in the very essence of who we are. So we're also planning to oppose future projects that are being proposed by Shell, and right now Shell has 2 new projects that are waiting for approval. And that's an expansion of one of their existing projects, which currently produces 100,000 barrels of tar sands oil a day, and they want to increase that up to 300,000 barrels a day. The next project that they have being proposed is called the Pierre Mine River Project. And this project is actually in an untouched part of the Athabasca Delta. So one of the things I didn't tell you about the Athabasca Delta is that it is one of the largest freshwater deltas in the world. It's very unique, and it's actually considered a UNESCO World Heritage Site because of the unique ecological landscapes that it has, and the fact that it's home to such a large range of biodiversity from flora and fauna and wildlife. And the Pierre River Mine Project, which is being proposed by Shell, is in an area that has not been touched. It is home to some of the most unique fens, which are water filtration systems. It is home to the critical habitat for the woodland buffalo, which are supposed to be a species at risk, and a protected species, as well as woodland, as well as the caribou species. And the Pierre River is also proposed on a continued to be used track line, as well as the ceremonial site for the Athabasca people. Now these projects combined together would be creating about 500,000 barrels per day of tar sands in an area that's already being inundated by over almost 1 we just cannot handle that anymore. So we're saying no. We're saying no to these projects, and we plan to fight these projects tooth and nail to the end through the hearing process to prove not only that it's causing the destruction to the land, but that the current state of looking at these projects doesn't even include an analysis of the impact on our traditional land use rights, our treaty rights, or how it will ultimately affect our ability to continue our cultural lifestyle. So, I really wanted you to think about the fact that the current regulatory system doesn't even look at this. And yet, this is something, again, we're calling ethical. How can we call something ethical if it doesn't even encompass looking at the basic rights of our people that are supposed to be constitutionally protected? ACFN is working really hard to fight the current standing and make it mandatory that they look at the impact of these projects not only on our rights, but on the land and on the people. We're demanding justice from the industry and the government, and we're saying it's time for them to take a step back and look at the current system and really fully understand what our rights are and what our needs are, and that protective measures are absolutely necessary in order for us to sustain our culture and lives and our protected rights. Many of our people are calling what's happening in Northern Alberta industrial genocide, and I completely agree with it. When we don't look at what's happening, we're slowly eroding the rights of these people, and our people are so intrinsically linked to the land that when you start to destroy that land, you are essentially destroying who we are. Tar sands development currently encompasses a huge amount of land, encroaching on numerous nations and ecosystems. And extraction methods are not just through open pit mines that I described earlier, but it's also through another method called in situ, which is also equally psychotic and involves superheating fresh water and injecting this superheated water into fragile ecosystems to melt the tar sands and then suck them up through more pipelines and then mix them with toxic diluents so that they can be shipped through pipelines which are crisscrossing across the entire continent of North America to refineries and communities like Vaughan, to the West Coast, down to Texas, and being shipped in super tankers down to California and into the Gulf of Mexico. This project touches coast to coast to coast to coast of the entire continent of North America. And although my community is what we consider in the heart of it all, this project is concerned not only to my people, not only to the people of this country, but to the entire planet, because we are literally the testing ground for these projects. These tar sands deposits exist in Madagascar, the Congo, Venezuela, and other countries with unstable governments. Now, if Canada can get away with what they're getting away with here, in a country that has supposed democracy, and they can get away with deeming this as ethical oil, this will give the green light to tar sands production